So as far as gaming handhelds go, for a lot of people, it doesn't get much better than the Steam Decks. Both are made by Valve, both share very similar designs, confining everything into these compact little machines that can morph themselves into pretty much any system you want. The amount of effort that has gone into making these handhelds the reality they've become today is pretty ridiculous. And as someone who has logged in probably too many hours than I should have on the original LCD model, I feel like 6 months has finally been enough time that going back and forth between the two of them, I've gained enough insight to share my experience about whether or not it's worth the upgrade for your money. To the point where the initial Steam Deck I bought was the 64 gig model because I didn't really know if I was gonna like it. So considering a new LCD model is under 300 bucks now, and the OLED is like $250 more, today we're gonna be discussing how my experience has differed between the models and which one I find worthwhile for the money today. Now, the OLED that I've been using is Valve's limited launch edition. Basically, it feels the same in hands as the LCD model. They did refine the buttons a bit and gave it a transparent smoke case with orange accents. It weighs a bit less, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same frame. Now, where things are different are the displays. It's gonna be the first thing you notice when you pick up either of these. The LCD model originally had an 800p screen, which went up to 400 nits of peak brightness, and now these newer OLED panels do get noticeably brighter. The OLED can actually reach up to 1000 nits now with HDR support. And while I'd say that I'm someone who doesn't normally game at the max brightness the display can hit because it can kind of wear on your eyes after a while, you can definitely appreciate the brighter visuals on the OLED display. And that's before you factor in the image separation you get when you use OLED. Now, where I've found a legit advantage of this display is during the day. If you're someone who's on the go a lot in bright areas, being able to just crank up the brightness and overcome the natural glare of the day is clutch. The screen is also about ½ an inch larger, and they did this by decreasing the bezel. So you feel like you're more immersed in the gameplay, especially during the day again, since the colors are that much more vivid and contrasty. Now on paper, Valve did not upgrade the actual resolution of the display. They kept it at 800p, and that's honestly probably a good thing. They're probably gonna save that for the next generation Steam Deck, and now you don't have any excess performance workload or battery life hits. So by keeping the 800p display, you didn't really stretch their means that much. Something I found interesting is that the human eye can perceive contrast as sharpness. So even if you have a display with a lower resolution, if you have a high contrast factor, it can give you the impression that it looks sharper than it actually is. And I would definitely say that's the case, especially if you're comparing the displays side by side. If you're gaming at night or in bed, the IPS glow is no longer a distraction anymore because the pixels are actually off. The infinite contrast you get with OLED and those deep blacks alongside the highlights you get with HDR support make the OLED display killer. Like the LCD, on the other hand, by itself still looks pretty good. Valve has done work tweaking the color profiles of these displays with updates, so you no longer need plugins like Decky to make the display look punchy. But honestly, the upgrade you get with OLED within itself is pretty substantial, and that's before we even talk about the increased refresh rate or the higher polling rate, the added performance. But we're gonna get to that. So the polling rate is now 180 Hertz, not as much of a big deal in my experience compared to the image refresh rate. You'll definitely notice it if you're scrolling. It's just a lot more responsive overall if you're interacting with the screen. Now, where things are extremely noticeable is that 90 Hertz refresh rate, especially on a day-to-day basis. If you have experience gaming on higher refresh rates or using a ProMotion display on an iPhone or an Android phone, that's where you're gonna notice a big difference. If you can find titles that can hit that upper limit of the refresh rate, especially the lighter ones, like indie games, it's definitely nicer to play on. Harder to run, but in the cases where games you play are very graphically intense, since the display is natively 90, the exact half point is 45, which on a 60 Hertz display would be 30. And the better frame times you get at 45 do feel miles smoother than the LCD model. Okay, but normally when you upgrade a display's brightness, you increase the refresh rate, you're gonna expect a battery life decrease. But since Valve has optimized the display package, the hardware of OLED panels is inherently more dense and thinner than a lot of traditional LCD panels, so they were able to pack in a larger 50 watt-hour battery and maintain better thermals by optimizing the fans and heat sinks. So battery life is actually superior on the OLED, kind of ridiculously better in some titles where I was hitting above the estimates from even Valve themselves. You can take the OLED model out and expect, again in my experience, playing indie titles like Vampire Survivors at a power draw of about 6.5 watts, I'm pulling almost 9+ hours of game time. Of course, this drastically goes down if you throw on something like Cyberpunk, but the fact that we're able to achieve 2 hours in some cases on a game that was annihilating PS4s a couple years ago on something that's battery powered is pretty insane. The LCD is no slouch when it comes to its power efficiency and gameplay, but the experience on OLED just really feels like they've dialed in and refined some of the main nitpicks everyone had with the LCD models. So as far as the upgrades on the battery and visual side, performance is one of those areas that a lot of people care about. And I think everyone knows at this point that the Steam Decks are not the most power-hungry, explosive handhelds out there. So Valve did change the APU with the OLED model, and they also added faster RAM. And the new chip is a redesigned custom AMD APU that uses a 6nm architecture, which happens to be more power efficient. So I've tested 3 Steam Deck models head-to-head in some of the previous videos where we covered how the gameplay experience changes when you double the RAM. And the OLEDs still managed to outperform all of them. Of course, there are devices out there that are going to outperform the Steam Decks. The brand new ROG Ally X is right around the corner. But let's be honest, the customer experience offered by Valve versus Asus is a night and day difference. I also like that the OLED model does crush downloads significantly faster than the LCD deck because of the upgraded Wi-Fi 6E support. The haptics are another area where they are ever so slightly refined with a tighter response, where I can feel like if I jump back and forth between the LCD and the OLED, I can tell you that the OLED does have the better control scheme. So to wrap things up, I want to keep this video nice, short, and simple. It's a tough decision. Like, the LCD is definitely not a slouch by any means. In my original OLED impressions video about 6 months ago, I thought it was fantastic. I did say that if you were happy with your LCD model, you don't have to go out and buy an OLED necessarily. But today, after using both of them pretty much head to head for all of 2024 essentially, I would say that if you are someone who's a power-hungry Steam Deck user that loves your Steam Deck and will absolutely take advantage of all of these additional upgrades, it might actually be worth the upgrade. Significantly more than you might think. They're both awesome handhelds. You really can't go wrong with either. They offer a game-changing experience that in a lot of cases, you didn't even really know you wanted. And you also have options to pick up a refurbished model, a used model. Steam Decks are getting cheaper, the industry's getting more competitive, and at the end of the day, we're winning. So that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Got some interesting projects coming up, so stay tuned for that.